Rosie McMahan identifies as an irreverent and opinionated white cisgendered woman who is also a healing activist, a feminist, an educator, counselor, an avid botanical enthusiast. Her poetry has been published in several genres, including Out in the Times of Unbearable Crisis and Silkworm. Born and raised in Somerville, MA, she works as a trainer in mental health, well-being, trauma-informed care, and healing practices. She also runs Optimistic Option, a private practice rooted in restorative justice principles. Receiving an M.Ed. from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, she is a writer who participates in community-based activities attempting to eradicate inequalities and help people move beyond their wounds. A rare story of hope and healing, Fortunate Daughter, a Memoir of Reconciliation, was announced as a first prize winner in the 2021 Chanticleer International Journal Book Awards. Maybe you've already read her book, maybe you identify with the experiences of injury and suffering, maybe you walk in the field of repair and renewal, maybe you see value in the heart of story as a way to mitigate the isolation many people feel in consequences to their trauma experiences, and more importantly, the subsequent healing that can take place once we feel less ashamed and alone. Maybe you see yourself in the story of this girl who grew up to be a woman, whole and unbroken. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my pleasure, excitement, joy, and honor to offer the show today, Rosie McMahan. How are you doing today, Rosie? Lovely to have you on.
I'm very appreciative of being here. I am well, and it's a beautiful fall day here in Massachusetts, and we need rain, but it's blue sky and sunny, so I'm not going to complain.
That's quite interesting, really. It's amazing that we're here to sit down, geographical far apart, virtue of internet connectivity, travel miles over the ocean to sit and have this conversation around your book. And I must say that you've got an amazing bio. I love reciting that, and I love the maybe aspect of it. That's a beautiful incorporation, I must say. It's quite unusual, but I love it wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. And I
Absolutely.
liked hearing it. It was great.
It's beautiful to say. I love it too. So, Rosie, I need to say that I am really impressed getting to discover your book, Fortunate Daughter, on Amazon. And I would like us to start by you telling us what inspired you to embark on this journey of writing this book, of bringing the story back to life. What led you? Because I know so many people have insight to wanting to write a novel, but they never did. Some wish they could, but to other people who eventually did, there is something particularly that pushed them to eventually do what they do. So, what is it that keeps you, that inspire you to create Fortunate Daughter? If you can run us through the making of this book, that would be great.
Gladly, gladly. Well, first, I want to say I think we might have some things in common. I was learning about you, and I read a review, I think, of the book Ecstasy of the Dead.
Yeah.
And it said that you were wanting to help others regain confidence after gloomy days. And
Mm,
I love sort of the poetry in that. And
mm,
I would say, I share that with you. And
interesting.
I think when we write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we bring ourselves into the
Mm,
story that we want to share with the world. We're not just, in a sense, trying to, express ourselves. We're trying to communicate. And I think I'm somebody who had a particular life and particular experiences that I chose to write about in this book that did get published. But
mm,
I've always used writing um, as my creative expression. I identify as an artist, and I think writing has helped me reflect on, understand, and make sense of what's happened.
mm,
And I think there are a lot of stories about injury and abuse and trauma. And
Yeah,
I think there are a lot of stories about healing. And I think
absolutely.
those stories reflect a reality. But I think the thing about my story that I think makes it quite rare, hopefully not extinct, um, but rare, is that I had this reconciliation that was embedded with the people who perpetrated the harms on me.
Mm,
And that experience of reconciliation is rare. And I think it's so rare, and we may talk about this later, that people are skeptical about it. But I think once you read the story, or once you talk to me, or once you learn more about what happened, um, I don't think it's hard to convince people
mm,
of what can come when you actually have a reconciliation. I also think, and it's a big question that you've asked, so I have a lot of
yeah.
thoughts. Anytime a person is a survivor of any kind of oppression, um,
Mm,
that when you say, this is what happened to me, new portals of possibility fling open.
mm,
And I want my story, my telling my story the way I did, to make that more possible for others.
mm,
I also think embedded in my story, and I'll make sure not to give away things that I don't want given away, but there's how we're hurt, and then there's how others around us, individuals and institutions, respond.
mm,
And a lot of people, when they get hurt, that's bad, but
yeah.
they don't necessarily feel believed or taken care of or
Mm,
advocated for on the powers that be. So then there's another kind of betrayal that happens. Um,
mm,
and in my story, I think there's instances of that betrayal, and then there's other ways that I'm responded to. And then I
mm,
guess I'll end in response to this question by saying there are a lot of misconceptions that people have of trauma survivors, especially people who've experienced familial childhood
mm,
sexual abuse. And
mm.
my father was the perpetrator, and you know, like a lot of
Wow.
people, he didn't just abuse himself in one way. It was emotional, it was physical, and it was also sexual. That again, I don't think is unique. Um, it's all too common. Um, what's unique is the piece that I term reconciliation. And that's what I wanted to share. And that's why I did what I did to get my book published. And I'm doing what I'm doing with you right now, talking about it
Mm,
in a way that shares it more.
mm. Dad, I must say it's an amazing story you've shared with us. I love listening to you talk about it quite beautifully and quite amazing and quite charming. A compelling one you've had, which we are going to unveil as we move ahead in the next interview. And I wanted to ask, because your memoir opens with a deep and personal account of trauma. What gave you the courage to put those first words on paper? And also, many people write to heal, while others write to remember. Quite historically, maybe they want their granddaughter in future time to read it long after they passed away or something of that nature. But what was your purpose of writing this book, and how did it evolve as you wrote it?
Great question. And then there's sort of, I always think of any kind of artistic expression as being kind of like a dream. You have the dream, and then you remember it, and then you try to talk about it, and then there's what you say that you didn't even know that you knew, and then there's what others sort of infer, and so this is all pretty complicated, and I think at times, quite revelatory.
Mm,
Um, so in response to the first question about bravery, I think sometimes people think of bravery or courage as being something that you do in the absence of fear. And the truth is,
mm,
it's not. You actually have a lot of fear, and you decide to act, with integrity or with purpose, and you sort of put the fear in a certain place so that it doesn't overshadow or dictate what your actions are.
mm,
And I think that a lot of people are brave, but I know that people make brave choices, and I think it's one part kind of not ignoring your fear, but recognizing that your fear isn't telling the whole story.
mm,
And I think that was embedded in the experience I had as a child growing up in my family, that the fears I had we're not always telling the whole story. So that's one
Mm.
thing. And then the other is, and maybe this is true for a lot of people when they act with courage, you kind of just don't know what you're getting into. It's not until you actually start to do it. It's not until I go to my parents and I say, I've written this book and it's going to get published. What do you think about that? Or it's not, I didn't know this happened to you. You know, you
Mm.
encounter the responses,
Yeah.
and it's continuing that you have to be brave and stand by this decision that you made. Again, not just to write, to remember, but to sort of offer something into this dialogue about reparation and justice. But I'll say it's almost like you don't know what you're getting into. And then it's like practice of anything. The more you do things that are brave, the easier it becomes. And
Mm.
I liked that you added kind of down the road. I have said to some family members who've objected to this story being told
Wow.
that I didn't write it for them. I didn't. I wrote it for people, you know, years from now. And I also wrote it for a larger audience that exists outside of my family. And
Mm.
so you have to be, I think, open to what that solicits, right?
Yeah.
Because, well, we'll talk about this sort of the role that's power imbalances in the world.
Oh, wow, that's an amazing addition and contribution you've got in there. I love your answer to that question. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, gladly.
Absolutely. And you know, Rosie, one of the most striking elements in your story is your decision to forgive your abuser, who is actually your father, quite
Mm,
shockingly. And you know, that's
mm.
something many people actually find to be unimaginable. Can you take us into that process? I know you wouldn't like to give much information away, but what does forgiveness mean to you now?
So yes, and you know, it's interesting that the title of the book, Fortunate Daughter, a Memoir of Reconciliation, I had to decide if it was a memoir of forgiveness or of reconciliation. And forgiveness is definitely embedded as a central theme, and as something that I experienced. But I think it came out of this experience of reconciliation, which
Mm.
again, I think if more people could have the opportunity of the experience that I had, they then might be willing to consider forgiveness as
Mm.
one response. You know, forgiveness, it's a complicated, I think, state of mind or state of heart
Yeah.
that's rooted in the real experience that I had of both rebuilding my life and recovering. And I was influenced by a lot of people. I was influenced by the particular therapist who helped myself and my family. I was influenced by watching other people who have been able to forgive or not forgive.
Mm.
I was greatly influenced. I'm feeling badly. Desmond Tutu, he wrote this book, and I had been, you know, aware of him for years, um, sort of defining forgiveness as this
Mm.
conscious act of releasing resentment that is at once, you know, something that allows for peace and resolution, but also it is a powerful act of self-interest. And I
Mm.
never say to people what they should feel. I don't say that just because I was able to forgive, therefore you should, or that it's, you know, it's just not easy. I don't
Yeah,
try
it's a
to
tough
be
one.
prescriptive, you know, in but to the level that I was able to forgive. And because that experience of forgiveness was so rooted in this other experience of reconciliation,
Mm.
I am better for it. I know I am. I
Mm.
can feel myself being more free to be myself and act in the world the way that I want to act, the way that I would
Mm.
like to believe, you know, everybody can act. And there's another piece in the story, you know, so at the beginning of the story, it's a lot about me, um, you know, showing the experience of a child in a family where there's all this violence and suffering, and then it moves into the story of me as a young adult beginning to, I'll say, heal, and
Mm.
then it moves finally into this whole reconciliation, which does involve both my mother and father. And I guess I want to bring this up too, which is There are the people who perpetrate the harms, but then there are
Yeah.
people around them. And in a lot of families, there's a way you're listening that I can sort of tell. We have the quote unquote bad guy, but then there are other people. And in this case, we had a father who was doing these things, and then we had a mother who didn't protect herself or her children. That
Mm.
also becomes a kind of harm, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, where am I going with this? I think I was able to forgive, thank goodness, because of the experiences that I had and because of the way I feel more able to move freely in the world.
Mm.
And that's what I would like for more people to have that experience.
Wow, I must say that's such a bold and courageous decision to make, if you ask me. Yeah, because most people who are being through that kind of experience live with a long life trauma, and even sometimes where we often say, okay, I've forgiven this, but then the memory is still there that we
Yeah.
might sometimes find so hard to erase. It's beautiful, yeah, it's gone, but sometimes it just pop all of a sudden, like, yeah, I've forgiven already. I love your
Yeah.
answer to that, really. Thank you for sharing. And that got me curious to ask you, after since the publication of this memoir, what sort of feedbacks have you gotten so far? And which one do you find to be much more interesting or memorable for you?
Oh, that's great. Um, well, so it's kind of a self-selected audience. I think there are people who, see the cover of my book and they look at me and they're like, "What do you mean fortunate? What was
Mm.
fortunate about
What is
that?"
about that,
And I say, right, yeah. And the
Mm.
that they're referring to is the pain and the suffering. And I don't think that's fortunate. I think that's just, part of this life we live, and you get plopped into situations, and some of them are wonderful and some of them are terrible. Some of them are joyful and some of them are sorrowful, right? So that's not the fortunate part. The fortunate part is sort of the making sense of it and being
Mm.
able to make sense of that experience with people who brought themselves to the task of reconciliation in a way that I think and I know is pretty remarkable. My
Mm.
parents, it was a mutual endeavor. They not only expressed what I call sort of genuine remorse,
Mm.
they participated in this whole amend making process that
Wow.
resulted in the sort of cycle of familial abuse, which we know is part of a lot of people's stories. It's not just what happened to you as a child, Peter, or to me as a child, Rosie.
Mhm.
It's what happened to your parents, what happened to your grandparents. And
Mm.
in our family, the cycle of, familial abuse, specifically childhood sexual abuse, stopped. Like,
Wow.
wow, like we did it, and
Mhm.
maybe it's not permanent, but it's definitely permanent in the grandchildren. And that's a big thing. And we live at a time, they just came out with this report, I think it was in the Times, where they were talking about a majority of people in the world right now are feeling a grievance. And
Mhm.
you have to wonder about that. You have to wonder what that sort of does, what impact it has. But I think when you're not carrying grievance, when you're not carrying resentment,
Mm.
um, there's all these other possibilities that exist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And about people responding to my book, I
Yeah.
do want to say, so there's people who just don't want to read it because they can't even imagine
Yeah.
that it's they think it's a tragedy, right? I'm like,
Mm.
no, it's not a tragedy. But I think people are invested in sort of thinking that the world is made up of sort of the good guys on one side and the bad guys on the other. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that in my personal life. I don't believe it in my
Mm.
professional work. Um, and there's this tendency to box and simplify. And so my story might not be for you because it's pretty complicated,
Yeah.
but the people who have come to my readings, who come to my book events, and then reach out to me, I get back to all of them. And most of them, um, almost all of them women, um, most of them feel like they still carry the injury in a way that it's too heavy. And they want to talk with somebody about how they can do that less. And
Mm.
anytime I have that interaction, and I've had many since my book came out in 2021, I feel my heart is gladdened, my heart is lightened. And I want that to be something, again, that more people can experience.
Wow. That's an amazing answer you provided to that. I'm excited to get to know about all of this lovely feedback you've gotten on the book publication, which I think is very important, really. And now I wanted to go ahead. How did you navigate the Lego ethical or emotional complexities of writing about family members and such deeply personal experiences? And also, were there moments during the writing process when you wanted to stop or censor yourself in one way as a protection method? How did you push through that period?
Mm, excellent questions, Peter. Well, I knew you were going to ask great questions. So yes, many moments. In fact, I got my book published through She Writes Press, and I'll say a little bit about that in terms of like how you can get my book. But
Oh,
um, at one point, when we were in the final stage before it was going to come out,
mm,
I called the editor and I said, "Listen, I've thought about it. I can't go through with this. I don't want the book to be called a memoir. I want it to be called a novel." This was like
mm,
last minute. And I was like, my heart was racing. I was, you know, just so
yeah, I
caught in the
understand.
grips of fear. Because,
Yeah.
Peter, when you speak truth to power,
Mm,
there's a risk, right?
yeah,
There's a risk. So
absolutely.
the editor kind of was very calm and she sort of chuckled and she said, Rose, I just need to tell you, even if you were to call it a novel, let's say you did that and I approved you doing that, there's no way that when you go out and market your book and do book readings and such, that anyone's going to believe you. They're going to know that it's a memoir. And you can't get out of it now unless you don't want to publish at all.
Oh my
Let's
God.
move forward. So that was like in the final moment. But the other thing I should also mention, both my parents have died. My
Mm,
dad's been dead for 15 years and my mother almost 10. And they
wow.
knew I was writing and they knew what I was writing about. And they gave me, their blessing. And I think they gave it, in a sense, very innocently. When the book came out, they were no longer alive. And that actually helped me tremendously because I didn't
Mm,
want them to encounter people approaching them with reproachment.
yeah.
And this is the thing
Yeah.
about forgiveness. You see, here I am talking about my parents, and you can tell I really care about them, right? I mean,
Mm,
as much, if not more, than when they were alive. Anyway,
mm,
they gave me their blessing. So that was huge. And then I've had among the larger family, I come from a large family.
extended
Um,
family.
some people like have basically communicated they don't really want to have anything to do with me because I dared to write the story and get it published. Oh well,
Mm,
if that's going to be the line you're going to draw, oh well, I can
wow.
accept it. But I've never really had anybody in the larger circle among people I've never, that I don't know, um, say anything so critical that it was too hard for me to hear.
Wow.
Yeah, I never have. I mean, yeah, yeah. It's been a good experience. It's been a good experience.
Wow. Wow. This is really interesting and quite compelling. Also, quite an interesting, beautiful conversation, I must say.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think so too.
Absolutely. And the book doesn't just explore individual trauma, it shows how entire families are affected. What was your family's response? I think you've mentioned a bit about this response to your healing journey. And did writing the memoir affect your relationship with them? You mentioned a bit about that now. Also, if you could say something to your younger self, which is the part
Mm,
I'd like to hear your take on, if you could say something to your younger self, especially during those period where you had all of these experiences, if you
yeah.
could say something to your younger self, the child in the early pages of Fortunate Daughter, what exactly would it be?
Um, Excellent question. I think, I in my work I do education and counseling and training, and so in addition to writing this book and encountering people and interacting with people who are really wanting to know, how can I heal? I remember my younger self, and I remember the different people who were there to respond or not, and when they responded, if it was helpful or not. And I think we underestimate what children know all the time. I think when I work with families, when I work with young people, I'm almost always certain that when the kids are talking about their family, they kind of are seeing it like in a very accurate way. And I have memories. I don't know that I wrote that much about them in the final version of the book, where I'm almost just barely verbal, but I can remember looking around and seeing what was going on when it was the painful bits and thinking to myself, this isn't right. There's
Wow.
something wrong with this picture. And I think a lot of young people have that internal sense. Maybe it's, I don't know, we could discuss it in another conversation, kind of, our moral compass, that I think relates to the sort of spiritual goodness we all have, and recognizing, injustice. And there was a lot of injustice in my household. And I think
Wow.
as a child, I knew that. So what I would have said to her, Rosie, as the younger self, 4 or 5 years old, is that it's going to get better. It is going to get better. And, really communicating my deep belief in her ability to navigate through the difficult experiences, which, many of which she was powerless to change. And emphasizing sort of what I would call just a belief in the human spirit and a belief in truth. You know, we also live, I'm going to say, at a time when the truth is debatable, and I say, well, there's personal truth, political truth, but there's objective truth. And when a father is misusing his power and abusing his children, that's a personal, political, and objective truth to say that it is not okay. It is
Yeah.
not okay. Um, so yeah, making sure that I knew that things would get better is what I would want.
Mm. Well, thank you for mentioning that. Which I think you've got an amazing perception towards all of these experiences, which is quite
Mm,
different from what most people would believe in, how they would react, or even to
yeah,
forgiveness would be the least that somebody would ever think of, because we live in a world whereby something of 50 years still rings in people's hearts, and they're
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I need to talk up. So forgiveness is such something that needs to go an extra mile to find. But you've got an amazing perception towards all of this roller coaster, which I find to be quite, well, I say, worthwhile or praiseworthy,
Mm.
commendable, I'd say. Thank you. Thank you for
Yes,
sharing.
yeah, no, thank you. I mean, here's the thing. What I want to also emphasize is I did have real people participating in a real life process of going through this difficult reconciliation process. If you don't have those people, I do want to say that people can give themselves an imagined reconciliation. It's a whole thing that I've been learning about. But when you mention, and I can tell you're referencing people that you know in
Yeah.
your own life, like the baggage that people carry. I think in the absence of the real people, you can give yourself an imagined reconciliation apology, and that can go the distance, along with other support and resources. But just to
Mm,
say that, as part of what I think people need, if they do want to not be so plagued by the past. We're here to live here and now,
yeah.
right? How can we be here and now when your life is disrupted by the past? And don't even get me started about the multi generations and legacies, right? That we can
Mm,
carry.
mm,
But I think there's always a way. There's always a way to lighten our load.
oh, wow. This is really impressive. Thank you very much for sharing all of this. And just apart from Fortunate Daughter, do you have any other works that you're currently working on?
I'm always writing. I'm always
Wow.
using writing both as a creative process as well as a healing process. Words on a
Mm,
page. You give yourself a little distance. You might
yeah.
know this.
Yeah.
So the thing that I've been writing for a long time that has been published that I hope will continue to get published in the future is poetry.
Wow.
Poetry doesn't sort of hit the market in the same way, but it does help me become a better writer. So I've got some
Wow.
short stories. I have a novel that I'm working on, but I'm writing poetry almost every day. So I don't have something that's coming out right now.
Mm.
But I continue to persevere as an artist who uses writing as her craft.
Interesting. That's amazing. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to pick up a copy of Fortunate Daughter, on what platform is it available on for purchase?
Oh, yeah. So let's see. Well, there's through my website, and I can send you the link so you can include it,
Yeah.
which is Optimistic Options, Fortunate Daughter, and there's a link I have included there. And then there's through She Writes Press, which was just actually they just went into an agreement with Simon and Schuster, but She Writes Press, you can go
Mm.
directly, and then there's Amazon, as we know, right? Uh, and occasionally there's local bookstores that I do book reading events at. But I think my website, Amazon, and She Writes Press are the three places that one can go to.
That's amazing to know. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Rosie's Fortunate Daughter directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So I must say thank you very much, Rosie, for joining me today in conversation around your amazingly written memoir, Fortunate Daughter. Quite interesting, quite fascinating that we can have this conversation. This is really impressive, so compelling, quite intriguing, and such a story you've got to tell. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, and I appreciate you having me as a guest and being the type of interviewer that you are. Thank you.
My pleasure.